The next meta threat, the next Zoodiac, Tier 1 solidified. These are just some of the quotes about arguably one of Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest flops. Magical Musketeers definitely had a lot of hype by both Konami and the Yu-Gi-Oh community as the next big thing. None of us expected that the only thing it would be next for was our failed cards and mechanics video. Magical Musketeers didn't live up to expectations. And we didn't see the signs as we were blinded by the fact that we had a deck that generated resources and allowed you to play spells and traps from your hand. Instead, we got a normal summon dependent brickhouse that burns out of resources quicker than the hype around the archetype. So what ended the career of these gunslingers? Let's find out in today's video. The transition from a play to Yu-Gi-Oh's newest archetype started in the TCG set Spirit Warriors on November 17, 2017. With Konami promoting the archetype heavily, everyone expected this deck to be part of, if not the top meta deck of 2017. They also had a major amount of support on release. 13 cards were introduced. 7 monsters, 2 spells, and 4 traps. The uniqueness of these Light Fiend shooters was that they had all continuous effects, which allowed you to activate magical musket spell traps from your hand during either player's turn. They also had secondary effects that you gained resources when a spell or trap was activated in the same column as the Musketeer. Magical Musketeer Caspar takes center stage. It's a level 3 Light Fiend monster with 1200 attack, and when a spell or trap is activated in its column, you add 1 magical musket card from your deck to your hand that's not the same name as that activated card. Doc is a level 3 Light Fiend with 1400 attack and 1200 defense. And when a spell or trap is activated in its column, you add 1 magical musket card from your graveyard to hand. Kid Brave is another level 3 Light Fiend with 1600 attack and 200 defense that lets you discard 1 magical musket card to draw 2 cards when a spell or trap card is activated in its column. Starfire is level 4 with 1300 attack and 1700 defense. And when a spell or trap card is activated in its column, special summon 1 level 4 or lower magical musket monster from your deck in face-up defense position except for itself. Calamity is their second level 4 Light Fiend with 1500 attack and 1300 defense that lets you target a 1 magical musket monster in your graveyard and special summon it when you activate a spell trap card in its column. To round out the level 4 Magical Musketeers, Magical Musketeer Wild with 1700 attack and 900 defense lets you target 3 magical musket cards in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, and then draw 1 card when a spell trap card is used in its column. For the boss monster, Magical Musketeer Mastermind Zakil was a level 8 Light Fiend monster with 2500 attack and defense, and could be tribute summoned using 1 magical musket monster. Like the other Musketeers, you can activate magical musket spell traps from your hand during either player's turn. However, it doesn't have a column-based effect like the others. Instead, once per turn during your opponent's end phase, you can draw cards equal to the number of magical musket spells or trap cards you've activated while this card was face up on your field this turn. These cards were nothing to slouch at. Okay, Zakil may have been the worst since you need to tribute summon it, and it doesn't have a column-based effect. But the level 4 or lower monsters had consistent effects that netted resources every time you used a spell or trap card. This includes spells and traps that weren't magical musket support. So, activating something like an upstart goblin to draw a card, or using Ties of the Brethren to get more musketeers from your deck to the field, would trigger any of the musketeers' effects from Caspar to Wild. Needless to say, they were already solid with regular spell and trap cards that weren't from their archetype. However, the deck shined when using their archetype spells and trap cards. For the 2 spells, Magical Musket Cross Domination, it's a quick play that targets a monster on the field, changes a monster on field's attack and defense to 0, and negates its effects until the end of the turn if you control a Magical Musket monster. Magical Musket Steady Hands is another quick play that targets a 1 Magical Musket monster you control and doubles its original attack and defense until the end of the turn, but that monster can't attack directly. Now for the traps, we start with Magical Musket Dancing Needle, a normal trap that targets up to 3 cards in either player's graveyard and banishes them if you control a magical musket monster. Desperado was their other normal trap that targets 1 card in the field and destroys it if you control a magical musket monster. Fiendish Deal is a continuous trap that prevents magical musket monsters you control from being destroyed by card effects. If this card is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can add 1 magical musket card from your deck or graveyard to your hand, except itself. And finally, Magical Musketeer Last Stand is their counter trap that negates your opponent's activation of a spell or trap card when you control a Magical Musketeer and destroy it. Many searchable spell and trap cards have effects from negation, graveyard removal, and protection. Alongside that, they can be played from the hand due to the continuous effect of Magical Musketeers, which is a bonus to playing the deck, as you don't have to worry about back row targeting cards. You're able to play multiple interruptions and get rewarded for doing so. Your opponent also had to be careful not to activate any spell and trap cards in the same column as your Magical Musketeers, as that would also trigger their effect, since their effect doesn't specify who plays that spell or trap card in the column. You can hear the Pendulum player scream, seeing a Casper and a Dock in the furthest left and right mode zones. The simple gameplay and bountiful effects had Lithium proclaiming this deck as the next Zoodiac, but it was a swing and a miss on this archetype, or in this case, a complete misfire about it. The community was just blinded by the playstyle of the Magical Musketeers, but completely ignored the significant flaws in their mechanics. The biggest hole in this archetype was the reliance on its normal summon. The deck had almost no special summoning abilities unless it incorporated it. If your opponent found a way to either remove the monster from the field or simply negated the effect of your monster, it would flat out end your turn. Magical Musketeers depended heavily on their trigger effects resolving to generate card advantage, and then start their snowball from there. Another problem that jammed these barrels was that all Magical Musket cards were hard once per turn. Seeing multiple copies of monsters or the same spell or traps would remain dead and stuck in your hand until you could use them next turn. It also forced you to use whichever spell or trap card you activated sparingly, as using it on the wrong target could leave you in a terrible position. It also made the deck even more bricky to play. Poor attack and defense stats were the final nail that stopped the deck's rise to contention. These monsters couldn't get over anything on the field, with the highest topping out at 2500 attack, if you could even summon it. They couldn't really overcome high attack power monsters at all. This would make it even more challenging to use a spell and trap sparingly, as you would most likely have to use them just to get rid of something that's no higher than 2000 attack. Though you also had links, it would be dangerous to go into them, as most of your Magical Musket spell or trap cards needed a Musketeer on the field. It couldn't have been a worse time to have this problem either, as meta contenders during 2017 had heavy hitters like Masterpiece, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, and ABC Dragonbuster, whose decks, ironically enough, had built-in countermeasures or certain cards to stop interaction on top of the ability to have strong boss monsters appear on turn 1. So, outside of poor matchups in the format, the deck literally shot itself in the foot with low attack monsters, hard once per turn effects, and a heavy dependence on the first monster they normal summoned. It's amazing how hype blinds the player from seeing weak points in an archetype. You'd think archetypes like Amorphage, Elemental Sabers, and Ignites could have warned players about not thoroughly thinking about the pros and cons of the deck and not following the crowd and what makes an archetype good. Magical Musketeers ended the year 2017 with a poor showing in high-end events. If Magical Musketeers were to have any chance of competing at a high level, they would need to fix most of the deck's underlying problems. They tried to address the summoning issues in the TCG set Dark Neostorm on May 3, 2019. Magical Musketeers gained a new continuous trap card, Magical Musket Crooked Crown. Though you can only control one Crooked Crown, during the main phase you can special summon one Magical Musket monster from your hand. And if you do, if your opponent's main monster zone in that monster's current column is unused, that zone cannot be used until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. This card helped alleviate the issues that Musketeers had with their summoning. The fact that it also knocked out your opponent's monster zones proved effective when disrupting decks that did heavy extra linking and multiple extra deck summonings during Master Rule 4 in 2019. As to play extra deck monsters outside the extra monster zone, you'd need to have a link in the extra monster zone. This was also useful in preventing links that need other links to co-link, like the Nightmare links. Though Crooked Crown's first effect stayed relevant as time went on, its latter became ineffective when Master Rule 4 revisions came down in 2020, making it possible to play certain extra deck monsters from your extra deck without having to use the extra monster zone, such as Synchros, Xyzs, and Fusions. So, while it might slightly hinder co-linking in today's game, it's completely ineffective against decks that don't depend on co-linking or links at all, like Branded and Ex's Sisters. Add in the fact that most decks today don't worry about monster placement, and what you have is a continuous trap that is only effective in niche situations. So, what it's worth is a great card to grant you a special summon and annoy a random Valence player. Did this change Musketeers' chances in the TCG? We shouldn't have to tell you by the name of today's video. Though it alleviated the pressure on your normal summon, it didn't change the fact that the deck was filled with hard once per turn spell and traps and low attack powered monsters, with its barely summonable boss monster peaking at 2500 attack and needing to be tribute summoned. Though Crooked Crown could bring out any of your Magical Muskets, including Zakil, it became another hard once per turn card to add to an archetype overflowing with an enormous amount of hard once per turn cards and potential bricking. However, in late 2019, they'd get a solid link in the TCG set Battle of Legend Hero's Revenge. For the final support piece, Magical Musketeer Max was a Link 1 Light Fiend monster with 1000 attack and required one level 8 or lower Magical Musket monster to make. When it's Link summoned, you can activate one of its two effects. You can either add Magical Musket spell or trap cards with different names from your deck to your hand, up to the number of monsters your opponent controls, or special summon Magical Musket monsters with different names from your deck, up to the number of spell or trap cards your opponent controls. It also had the continuous effect, allowing you to activate Magical Musket spell or trap cards during either player's turn. Max was a tremendous second option that helped you capitalize on punishing your opponents overextending. It cost a meager 1 Magical Musket monster, and could either replenish your hand with resources, or give you board presence by special summoning monsters straight for the deck for no cost. And regardless of those monsters' levels, this was good news to the Magical Musketeer players, who finally had their own in-archetype option to be able to go second. The bad news was that this card was useless first turn, as it was absolutely reliant on what your opponent had on their side of the field. What's worse than being a second turn option reliant on your opponent's board? Being a card attempting to resolve on the second turn. Not only was the game at this point the quickest it's ever been, but going first was always seen as the most advantageous of turns, as a majority of top decks at the time were control boards from Orcus, Thunder Dragon, Subterror, Salamangreat, and variants of Lunalight decks, who hilariously could play going first or second. Not only would you have to hopefully get through multiple negations or interruptions, but be able to resolve Max when it's summoned. Magical Musketeer was too linear of a deck with limited options to go through when playing it pure, hindered by needing a Magical Musketeer on the field to resolve Magical Muskets, their low attack power forcing you to unwillingly use your options to clear over simple board problems, and now having your only in-archetype Link dead on first turn, and praying it could resolve through the Hailstorm of negates and board removals. Though the archetype did do better in the TCG than its time in the OCG, it wasn't enough to persuade the community that the deck was competitive enough to contend with the meta. By 2020, people let this deck hit the dusty trail, allowing these gunslingers to ride off into the sunset. There was some stir in the TCG with Magical Musketeers, and yes, both of these stirs involved playing Musketeers with another broken or powerful engine. The first engine was the Runic package, known in the TCG as one of the game's most splashable control-based archetypes. Runic cards can generate free advantage while removing resources from your opponent's deck. Combine this with an archetype that plays its resources from their hands in Musketeers, and you have one of the most unlovable things since the invention of taxes. You can play out your Musketeer monsters, activate a Runic spell in the same column as that monster, and special summon a Hugin while triggering that Musketeer's effect. If you don't draw enough pieces of your Magical Musketeer cards, you can just use your Runic engine to stall until you get the resources needed. The second engine is a newer archetype sweeping the community and wallets by storm. Fiendsmith is a light fiend archetype that utilizes discards and graveyard recovery of light fiend monsters to make links and even fusion monsters. What makes this engine even better is it doesn't eat up your normal summon, and has no restriction that locks you out of your extra deck options, meaning you can play this engine before you play. At best, the engine is a Beatrice and Aerial Eater. At worst, it baits out hand traps, while still making Beatrice. With all that information, what correlation do Magical Musketeers and Fiendsmith have in common? It just so happens that the Magical Musketeers and Fiendsmith archetypes are coincidentally light fiend monsters. This opens up your deck's ability to go first or second, protects your Musketeers from harsh hand traps that can usually end your turn, and most importantly, gives you another line of play with Fiendsmith cards that synergize with your Musketeers, such as Fiendsmith's Tract, which searches out any light fiend monster and has a graveyard effect that allows you to fusion summon Fiendsmith monsters using materials in your hand or on the field, giving you access to Fiendsmith powerful fusions like Lacrima, who gives the deck powerful recursion and the ability to play more extenders, and Dizerai, whose effect can negate multiple cards in the field up to the total link rating of link monsters equipped to it, and can also return one of your fiend monsters back to the deck and target one card in the field and send it to the graveyard. You can even use your Musketeers to link summon Fiendsmith Requiem, a link 1 that only needs a light fiend monster to make, allowing you to go into full Fiendsmith combo if your Magical Musketeer line is failing. The strategy also incorporates other cards to combat Musketeer's woes with going second, with cards like Link into the Vrains, a normal spell that lets you special summon one monster from your hand with its effects negated, then immediately link summon one link monster using monsters you control as materials, including that monster. The link summon can't be negated, and your opponent can't activate cards or effects when a monster is link summoned by this card. So, your option for running a good Magical Musketeer deck is to have it get carried by the most hated control cards in an online simulator, or have it get carried by the most hated free extension card in the game for the price of your current rent. The saddest part is that both these engines can play better without Magical Musketeers, as they can sustain themselves or even be used in better decks like Fiendsmith and Snake Eyes, and Runic and Bestials, or just Stun in general. It really goes to show how much hype can carry cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! We were wrong with Sea Monster of Theseus becoming the extra deck staple for years, thinking Amorphages would be a terror in the meta, and now thinking that Magical Musketeers would be the next Zoodiac, which is now the biggest lithium meme in history. Though the ability to play spells and traps from your hand without fear back row was appealing, ignoring that most of their cards clog due to them being hard once per turn, their high dependency on the normal summon, and that their underwhelming attack made it hard to clear boards and do damage, gives more cons than pros when playing the deck. They also have a horrendous time going second, even with Max, which capitalizes off of your opponent's board. But that's if they can resolve without issue. Unlike the Opera, Max doesn't have a happy ending in this script. Magical Musketeers are, unfortunately, the Jamarcus Russell of Yu-Gi-Oh! Enjoy your stay in the Hall of Fail.
Oh no, I seem to be lost in these woods. I hope no one tries to sell me product.
Hello there, are you in the woods looking for card sleeves to keep your cards safe?
Oh thank goodness. Can you tell me how to get back to the main road?
No can do, but I can tell you about these amazing Blood Moon packs with matching Field Center.
I just want to get home.
You're worried about the price, huh? Well, good thing we have bundles. If you get the Blood Moon bundles, you can get the card, Field Center, playmat, and even a leather box.
I was out here to bury a body.
Well, you just have to go to the TheDuelLogs store to find out. Visit TheDuelLogs.com or click one of the links under the video in order to check out an assortment of card sleeves and playmats.